So I recently asked all of my Instagram followers to send me in some specific tropes or topics that you're looking for when it comes to books so that I can help you fill up your holiday wish list. And you guys definitely came through. So thank you so much to every single person who took the time to send something in because I really do appreciate it. Wouldn't have been able to make this video without you guys. So with that said, I did go through all of them. You guys gave in some amazing responses and I'm really excited to share with you the recommendations that I matched up for you. I did want to say though that I have made this video, I believe 4 times in the past. I'll have all of my previous videos linked down in the description below for you. And my reasoning for telling you this is because I try very hard not to repeat myself in these videos. So every time that I collect all of your responses, I try to go back to my previous ones and not overlap a lot. So I'm not going to repeat some questions that were asked in the past. I'm not going to match it up with the same books. I might have some books that were mentioned in previous videos, but I'm matching them up to different responses. So if for some reason you don't find any recommendations in today's video, you have 4 other videos that you can check out that have an entirely different collection of books that I have recommended to people in the past. So with that said, let's get started. So I cannot even tell you how many people specifically asked for Christmas themed book recommendations. And unfortunately for you guys, this video is not going to be filled with those because I am not a big Christmas reader. So therefore I don't really have any recommendations for you other than this first one that I'm going to share with you. So somebody did specifically ask for a Christmas themed book set in New York City. And I actually was able to think of one because it doesn't actually take place over Christmas time, but it still is a Christmas theme. So a little bit of a cop out, but it's all you're going to get from me. So that book is Happily Letter After by V. Keeland and Penelope Ward. So in this book, you're basically following a girl who works at, I forgot what type of magazine in New York City, probably like a Vogue or something like that. But basically she writes a lot of columns and happens to be when the holiday season comes around, she is in charge of Secret Santa, except I believe this book is taking place either like over the summer, maybe July, June or something like that. And basically she ends up getting a letter from one of these kids that sent in a Secret Santa letter. And she didn't really want to like throw it away because she felt really bad, but it wasn't time to start the column or anything like that. So instead what she does is she opens it and just like reads it for fun. And happens to be she was really like blown away with what the kid said. Like I forgot the details of it, but it was more or less like, oh, I don't have a mommy and I really want to make my dad happy. So I'm looking for a girlfriend for him or maybe like a wife for him. And I'd also like to get him some socks because he really needs some socks. And it was like random, really adorable things like that. But don't take my word for the details because I did read this a while ago. But either way, this girl's like, oh my God, I want to answer her. I want to be her Secret Santa. So she ends up sending her a couple of things that she asked for. I believe she asked for like olives and like I said, like the socks or something like that. So she sends her a little package and then she ends up getting a letter back being like, oh my God, thank you so much. So now I'm looking for this and this and this. And then it kind of like starts a thing. And then this girl ends up basically not knowing how to stop it. And she kind of gets like really obsessed with this little girl that she's been like corresponding with. So she ends up kind of like, you know, meeting her in person of sorts, but it ends up being a very weird situation. And she kind of like lies to the dad about it. I believe she like ended up showing up at this guy's house. Like he lives in a fancy brownstone. He has like a very nice job or something like that. And he's like a really grumpy guy. And he like opens the door one day and she doesn't really know what to say. So she pretends to be like his dog trainer or something like that. And that's how she like gets her foot in the door. And then it kind of just like spirals from there. But basically this book does have a Christmas theme, like a Christmas vibe to it, but it doesn't take place like, you know, the holiday season, but it does take place in New York City. So I feel like it was a close enough of a match for you. Next up, someone asked for a book where they get trapped together in a snowstorm. So the first one I was able to think of is Faked by Carl Sorensen. So this is the second book in the Ward Sisters companion series. I am a really big fan of the entire series in general. I've read the first book, absolutely loved it. Read the 4th book, absolutely loved it. Skipped to the 3rd book because I believe it had tropes in it that I wasn't a fan of. But either way, this is a really amazing book as well. I believe I gave it 5 stars at the time that I read it. You're basically following this guy who is a professional snowboarder and he ends up somehow fake dating his younger brother's best friend's twin sister. So it's a very like interesting dynamic of how these two people actually end up getting together. But basically they end up going on a date with each other and then it ends up turning into like a fake dating scenario a little bit. And then somehow that ends up turning out to them getting stuck in a cabin in the middle of a snowstorm. And it is just a really, really fun time. So if that was a scene that you were looking for in a really good romance book, I highly recommend giving this one a shot. The next response I got was somebody asking for enemies to lovers with some sort of involvement of a bakery or a coffee shop. So I do have 2 books that I was able to think of for you. The only thing is that I read both of these books a very long time ago, and I do remember enjoying them when I read them, but I don't know if they live up to my expectations now. So if you do end up deciding to pick these up, and then for some reason they end up not being that great, just know it was because I read them a while ago and my tastes have definitely changed, but I still remember them being good. So that is why I wanted to recommend them to you in case you end up wanting to try try them out. So the first book I have for you is Kiss My Cupcake by Helena Hunting. So this is basically about a girl who has been working on opening up this alcohol and like cupcake shop for a very long time. Like she's going to be serving alcohol while they're either like making cupcakes or decorating cupcakes, something along those lines. And basically she's getting very close to her grand opening. And then all of a sudden this like shop next door ends up starting to like do construction because this guy is now trying to open up a alcohol and like axe throwing thing or something like that. So very similar to her, but kind of a little bit more of a grungy vibe, but same customer base. And unfortunately for her, that is kind of going to really derail her grand opening of sorts. So she ends up not really liking this guy right off the bat. They end up starting to like fight all the time, really bantering like left and right. And obviously they're not going to get along. They have a very natural enemies to lover situation going for them. So they're kind of going to both open up their business, really fight each other for customers and things along those lines. And then eventually a third party is going to start opening up like across the street from them or something that's going to try and steal both of their customers. And now they're going to have to work together to try and bring that company down so that they can save both of their businesses. And that is when they're slowly going to fall for each other. So it definitely is an enemies to lovers, and it definitely does have that bakery sort of vibe to it if that was what you were looking for. And then happens to be, I have one other book that is called A Sweet Mess by J.C. Lee. So this book is basically about a girl who owned, I think, either like a coffee shop or a bakery with a coffee shop like in this small town. And happens to be one day this random guy is passing through and ends up like, you know, asking for like a piece of cake from her coffee shop. Like he's just like, you know, on his way out and he just needed a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. And happens to be somebody ended up giving him the wrong piece of cake. Like she was making a specialty cake for like this kid's birthday party and it was not supposed to go to a normal customer, but somehow it ended up on his plate and he really, really hated it. And unfortunately for her, he was actually a food critic. So he ends up writing a really bad review for her and it kind of like tanks her business. And now he kind of feels really bad, but he doesn't really want to like rescind what he had said because he's never done that before. And he really doesn't want to ruin his reputation by putting out like I was wrong sort of letter. So instead what he does is he offers her a spot on his baking show that he's about to make. Like he's a very good critic of sorts. And therefore he just offers her a spot as one of the contestants of sorts. And basically she's going to have to take it because her business is literally in shambles and she has to save it any way she can. So she's kind of going to move into this house where like all of these people are staying and he is staying there as well. So it does have a little bit of like that forced proximity sort of situation thing going on. And they kind of really don't get along because of this situation of how they actually met originally. And then obviously they're going to just slowly fall for each other. So it does have that enemies to lovers sort of vibe going for it. And it does have that bakery theme as well. So a surprising amount of you guys actually asked me for like mystery recommendations, which I thought was a little funny because if you are familiar with the type of books I read, then you know that I don't generally read mysteries, but happens to be, I do have a couple that I've read in the past and I never really actually have a chance to talk about them because they don't usually fit into the videos that I make. So I thought it was a perfect chance to share with you a murder mystery because someone specifically asked for that. And I remember really enjoying one that I read in the past. And that book is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. So this is a very popular book. Wouldn't be surprised if you've heard about it before, but just in case you haven't, I will quickly tell you what it's about. So happens to be, this is the first book in a trilogy. And I will say that you do have to read all three books to get the characters happily ever after. But by the end of the first book, you do get the answer to the first mystery. But then some other things arise that move you into book 2, and then that moves you into book 3. You get what I mean? Like it kind of just like all builds up on each other, but you do kind of get 3 mysteries in this trilogy, if that makes sense. But either way, this is a YA mystery. And in the first book, you're basically following this girl who has to do a project for a class. Maybe she's like trying to get herself into college. I don't really remember the details, but either way, she decides to take on this case that was supposedly solved about something that had happened to a couple of people that were a couple of years older than her in her small town. So basically, this guy supposedly killed his girlfriend and then killed himself. And then that was like, you know, the answer to the mystery. But she never really believed that this guy actually had killed his girlfriend and then committed suicide to cover it up or just get away with it or whatever it is. So she decides to re-look into this mystery and try to figure out what actually really happened. And then that is more or less the gist of what goes on in this book. She's kind of just going to try to figure out what happened. And then throughout this book, she is going to end up meeting up with the younger brother of the guy that had committed suicide and supposedly had killed his girlfriend. And throughout all 3 books in this series, you are going to get a little bit of a romance between like those 2 people. So happens to be, it was a very cute romance. I really did enjoy the couple, like, you know, watching them throughout all 3 books. And I also really did enjoy the mysteries that took place throughout these stories. So if you were looking for a murder mystery and you were down for a YA story, I would recommend checking out this series if you have not yet. Next up, someone asked for good writing. Why is that so difficult recently? And happens to be, I very much related to this response. So I really wanted to give you a recommendation. And first up, I think that at least for me, why I have been feeling this a lot recently is because I do read a lot of indie and self-published books. And lately, my issue with a lot of the books that I haven't been enjoying as much was that I felt the writing was lacking in one way or another. And I feel like that's just a little bit of a natural thing that's going to happen when you read a lot of self-published books, because they don't generally go through the same editorial processes that some of these books that are from that do have like a publisher behind them usually go through. And therefore it's just naturally what's going to happen when you're reading like the type of books that I personally read. So if you are in, the same niche of romance books that I'm in, then this is probably why you are feeling this as well. But either way, I did recently read this book that I just remember specifically very much enjoying because I thought that it was just so freaking well written. And that book is Quarterback Sneak by Candy Steiner. So this is the third book in her college football romance companion series. And in this book specifically, you're following this guy who I believe was the captain of his football team, and he's going to end up having a romance with the coach's daughter, who is very much off limits. So kind of has that forbidden feel to it. And the thing is that I feel like that's a very classic storyline. If you read a lot of sports romances, that's something that you'd come across a lot. But what I found to be so unique and different about this book was the way that the romance and the relationship was actually built up. And then also like the details of the book in general, like the way that the characters were built up, the things that they were dealing with, the things that they were going through, the way that they connected, and just everything that actually happened throughout the story, I feel was just so freaking well written. This was a 5 out of 5 star book for me. And I just remember like specifically absolutely loving the writing. I remember writing in my review right after I had finished reading this, that like I felt like the author was like on point when she was writing this book. Like from beginning to end, I never felt the need to skim. I was hanging on to every single word. And I just feel like in general, this book was just so freaking well written in every sense of the word. So if that was something that you were possibly looking for, like a sports romance with a little bit of forbidden aspect, and you want it to be very well written, I would highly recommend giving this book a shot. Next up, someone asked for enemies to lovers, but with a single dad ex-nanny, and both of them are royalty. So I really had to think about this for a second because I couldn't think of a situation where a nanny would ever actually be a royalty. So I had to like forget about the one little fact that you said where both of them should be royalty. I'm going to take that out, and I actually found you a recommendation that basically fits this 90% of what you asked for, and that is A Nordic King by Karina Hall. So this is a nanny single dad romance. You're following this girl who ends up getting a job to be the nanny for the King of Denmark's 2 children. I think that like he has twin little girls or something like that, but it doesn't really matter. Either way, it is a nanny single dad sort of romance with royalty, and happens to be they do not get along right off the bat. He didn't really want to hire her for whatever reasons that he had, but the kids really liked her right off the bat. So they kind of convinced the dad to be like, no, we want her as our nanny. So he obviously can't say no to his kids. So she ends up getting the job, but he wasn't very nice to her. So therefore she doesn't really like him back. And that's kind of where the enemies to lovers sort of vibes come in. And I wouldn't say that it's like a very big enemies to lovers, but it's more of like they just really don't get along. And because of that, they do end up having a lot of like bantering, but also a lot of flirting. And that is kind of where I wanted to tack on somebody else's response who asked for the best back and forth bantering and flirting. And I feel like I could have found a lot of books that fit into this situation, but happens to be, I remember specifically really enjoying the bantering and flirting in this book. So I just wanted to like, say it all in one. So this is a book that I'm going to recommend for both of these responses. I think that they fit very well for both of these. And I highly do recommend it if you do like that royalty aspect in your single dad ex-nanny romances. So next up, someone asked for a dad's best friend or colleague. And right off the bat, I was able to think of a really good book that I enjoyed that had a dad's colleague sort of situation. And that book was Scandalous by L.J. Shen. So this is the third book in the Sinner of Saints companion series. And you could definitely read this as a standalone, but I happen to be a fan of the entire series in general. But either way, this one specifically is a forbidden romance between this 19-year-old girl and then this 32-year-old single dad. At least I believe he's 32. I could be wrong about that. But either way, it's definitely a big age gap. And happens to be this guy just recently got a new partner for his business. He's very wealthy. He owns this big business, and they recently brought on, a new partner. And then happens to be this partner has a daughter, and she's going to end up getting an internship in this guy's office. And then obviously they're going to end up having a forbidden romance. So definitely a dad's colleague sort of vibe. Also has a little bit of that workplace environment sort of thing. And then it is also an age gap. And then he is also a single dad. So if that sounds like it's something up your alley, I definitely recommend giving this one a shot. And then happens to be kind of connected to this book, I have another response that I wanted to answer, which was books where one of the characters doesn't talk because of trauma. And I wanted to share with you A Broken Night by L.J. Shen. So this is the second book in the All Saints High companion series, which is a spin-off series to the Sinner of Saints series. So this is basically a series about like all these people, and then they eventually are all going to have children, and then this is a series about those children. So happens to be in this book, I had said how this guy was a single dad, and happens to be he has a little girl who I believe is like either 2 or 3 years old at the time, but I don't really know that. I forgot the details, but either way, this girl does not talk because her mother had abandoned her, and the second that the mom left, she just stopped talking. She could talk, but she chooses not to. And then throughout this book, you're basically kind of dealing with the fact of like he doesn't know how to deal with his kid because, you know, she's going through this and he doesn't know how to help her. And the couple was never together. Like he didn't, like he wasn't abandoned. It was kind of like a one-night stand. It turned into a baby, and then the mom eventually like ran off because she was like a druggie or something like that and was only there for the money of sorts. So he doesn't really care about the woman, but like basically that's the situation that's kind of going down in this book. And then happens to be you end up getting a story about the girl once she's older. And in this book, I believe she's either like in her first year of college, last year of high school, somewhere around that age. And she's going to end up having a childhood best friends to lovers romance with one of the kids from one of the couples from the previous series, like one of the Sinner of Saints books. They end up having a little boy. They end up becoming best friends as children, where you get to kind of see a little bit of their friendship starting in one of the epilogues in one of the Sinner of Saints books. Then either way, later you end up getting to see that they're still best friends, and then they end up getting their happily ever after finally. So if you were a fan of that type of storyline, like childhood best friends lover situation, and you were looking for a book where one of the characters does not talk because of trauma, then this is literally the perfect book for you. So this next response I actually thought was pretty funny because it was more or less the exact opposite of the last book I just recommended to you. And this person had asked for a book where the girl experiences something bad or traumatic and doesn't pity herself the entire book. And I totally get you wanting to read a book like that, because very often when you're reading about a damaged hero or a damaged heroine, the fact of the book is that you're getting this other person who's going to end up kind of like saving them in some way and kind of really like, you know, supporting them in one way or another because they're dealing with the things that they're dealing with. And it does have a very pitying vibe to it. But happens to be I was able to think of a recommendation that does not do that, and that is Waking Olivia by Elizabeth O'Rourke. So this is a college sports romance. You're basically following this girl who is on the track team. She actually started on a D1 track team, but then she ended up getting kicked off and getting bumped down to a D3 college. And the reason for that is because she has a very bad attitude because she is dealing with something in her personal life, which happens to be is that she runs in her sleep. She can fall asleep, and then without knowing it, she might run miles and miles in her sleep. She won't even put socks on because she's literally in the middle of sleeping, and then her feet will be all cut up. She'll be super winded, and then she'll show up to the track the next day, like, you know, for practice, and then she basically won't be able to perform to her like fullest ability. So for that reason, as well as some like, you know, attitude reason, she ended up getting kicked out of her first college, got bumped down to D3 college, and now she's on a new track team and she's getting a new coach. And happens to be he kind of realizes that something is a little bit off with her, so he kind of tries to push himself into her life and try to help her. And she really does not want to take the help. She's like, please leave me alone. Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, let me just deal with it. I really don't want anybody to get involved. But he really doesn't take that for an answer, and he's going to end up pushing himself into her life and basically helping her through the things that she's dealing with. And then happens to be slowly throughout the book, you're kind of find out why she is running in her sleep, and it has to do with something very traumatic that did happen in her past. So I will say that you should definitely look up some trigger warnings for this book because it does get a little bit dark at times. But if that was something that you were looking for, like when basically the girl is not very like pitying sort of thing, but she is dealing with something very traumatic, I definitely would recommend giving this book a shot because this was probably one of my favorite reads of this past year. Next up, someone asked for a single mom trope where the love interest slowly falls for the kid and the mom. And happens to be, I'm a huge single parent fan, and I feel like this generally does happen in every single parent romance book. And I do have at least one romance recommendation video that is surrounded by single parent tropes. So I'll have that link down below for you in case you want like a couple of more options than the one I'm about to give you. But I did choose one that I feel like very specifically, like very heavily fits into exactly what you asked for. And that book is Wrecked Palace by Catherine Cowell. So this is a romantic suspense story that does take place in a small town. And at the beginning of the book, you basically find out that this girl is now going to have to become the guardian to her little siblings. I think she has like a little sister and a little brother, something along those lines. It doesn't really matter. But basically, she's not necessarily a single mom, but she has to basically become their guardian because her parents are no longer fit to like take care of them. And if she doesn't want them to go to foster care, she's going to have to quit college and basically become their parents. So that is exactly what she does. And she's now working on a couple of jobs just to be able to like pay the bills and take care of them and make them happy. And at the beginning of the story, you kind of meet this guy who lives in this small town. He's kind of like very secluded, doesn't really talk to anybody. He kind of lives on his own, and happens to be she works in a grocery store that he visits very often. So they're kind of familiar with each other. And at one point, this girl is basically asking her boss for like a couple of more hours because she's having a little bit of a hard time paying the bills. And this guy kind of like feels bad for her. So he ends up offering her a job to basically be like his personal chef or something like that. And she easily takes it because he's offering her like way more money than the job like that deserves. So she literally cannot say no. So they end up kind of becoming like unlikely friends. And happens to be she's very often going to have to like bring the kids over because like she has to just like, you know, drop something off for him or whatever it is. And they're kind of all going to become friends. Like he's going to become very close to the kids and she's going to become very close to him as well. And that is slowly going to develop a relationship between the two of them. But I happen to think that this book specifically was so cute in the sense of how they first formed this friendship. Like not only the two adults, but also like the kids with this guy. And that is kind of one thing that really brought this couple together. And I really enjoyed seeing that aspect in this story. So if that was something that you were looking for, I highly recommend giving this book a shot. Next up, someone asked for enemies to lovers, but they're both rich. Rich example, Kiss the Sky, Empire of Lust, fake Empire, Ruthless. I don't even know what you were saying, but basically I understood what you kind of wanted. And I do have a recommendation for you that I recently read and really, really enjoyed. And that book is King of Wrath by Anne Hong. So this is the first book in a new one of her companion series. I think it's called like King of Sin or something like that. I don't know. But either way, she's the same author that wrote all of the like Twisted books, like Twisted Love, Twisted Games, that whole series. And either way, this one is an arranged marriage between two very wealthy people. This guy is basically like the most eligible bachelor in New York City. He's kind of like in the socialite circle of sorts. And then this girl is definitely a New York City socialite. She is a jewelry heiress. And she always knew that one day she'd basically be arranged to be married to someone. And she just thinks that one day her father found her a very good match. So she's like, look, I want to make my father happy. This is just what I knew I was always going to have to do. So I'm going to go along with it. And then happens to be, she is not aware that this guy is actually being blackmailed into this arranged marriage by her father because her father just really wanted to get the connection of being tied to this very wealthy guy. So that is kind of the situation of like where this arranged marriage kind of started. So therefore, this guy is very unhappy about the situation and he literally hates this girl's guts because he's like, I'm literally only marrying you because I'm being blackmailed into it, except you are unaware of that because I cannot tell you. And therefore, he doesn't really act very nice to her. And therefore, she doesn't really like him in exchange because she thinks that he is just like a really mean, a grumpy sort of guy. So definitely does have that enemies to lovers feeling to it, but it also does have an arranged marriage thing going on to it. So basically all around the board, it's got a lot of good vibes. If this was something that you were looking for, rich enemies to lovers, this is the book I recommend checking out. So I'm only going to do a couple of more responses for you guys because I feel like I've been sitting here for a while and I don't want this video to be like forever long. But either way, next up, someone asked for a non-sports college romance. And what's funny is that the first second I saw this, I was like, oh, that's not that hard. I could totally find you a regular college romance that isn't sports related. And then I started looking at all of my recommendations, like all the books that I read. And I'm like, wait, all of the college books that I read literally are sports related. So this was actually much harder to find you a recommendation than I originally thought it was. But I did end up finding you something. And it was a little bit of a cop-out because it's not like the easiest book to recommend to you, but I wanted to recommend it anyway because I will take any chance I get to talk about this book. And that book is Addicted to You by Kristen Macarici. So this is the first book in a 10-book series. And that's kind of why I feel bad recommending it because I know a lot of people are a little bit hesitant to get involved in a series that is that long. But this is one of my favorite series of all time. So I really couldn't help but try to convince you on this if you have not read it yet. So if you are a little bit unfamiliar with this story, I know that it could be a little bit intimidating to get involved in a series that is that long. So I actually have an entire video for you on how to read the series, in what order, why you're reading in that order, what you can expect from it, everything along those lines. I'll have it linked down below in case you did want to look into this story a little bit more. And happens to be in the first book specifically, it is very college based, but the rest of the series doesn't really like have a very college feel to it. You kind of like, develop as the story develops, but happens to be the first book specifically is very heavily taking place in college. And that is why I couldn't help but give this as the response for the question that you had asked for, sort of thing, Anyway, in this book specifically, you're following these two people who are childhood best friends. And now that they're older, they are fake dating each other because they both have these addictions that they're trying to hide from their family. And if they were in a relationship, then that gives them kind of an excuse to stay a little bit away from their family, and therefore their family will never find out what they're actually dealing with, sort of thing, So this guy is an alcoholic and then this girl is a sex addict. And that is a very big thing for this story in general. Like that's something that you're going to really be dealing with as you go through the later books in the series. But happens to be the first book, they are both now in college and they're kind of having a little bit of a hard time, getting getting through their classes because of their addiction. It's really kind of like pulling them down. Even at one point, this girl ends up getting a tutor, and the tutor ends up being one of the main characters for like, the rest of the series. And there's a lot of people that you're gonna end up following, and you end up getting to meet a lot of them in this first book. So this is a really, really great story, and it does technically take place in college, the first book at least, and it has absolutely nothing to do with sports romances. So if that was something that you were looking for, I do recommend looking into this series a little bit more and seeing if it's maybe worth a shot for you. But then happens to be, I did get another response where someone asked for a teacher-student, and then that's kind of what clicked in my head of like, well, if you're not reading a sports romance, you might be reading more of like a taboo forbidden romance, and therefore I wanted to answer the teacher-student romance, which also fits into the non-sports college romance. And the first one I was able to think of was Voyeur by Fiona Cole. So this is a teacher-student forbidden romance, and you're basically following this girl who needs money for tuition. So she ends up getting a job at a sex club that kind of has like a voyeur theme to it, which is basically just like people can request for you to do some stuff behind a one-way mirror. You don't know really who's requesting it, but you can basically either say yes or no. And then if you say yes, then they can either like watch you and do whatever it is that they want to do. It's a sex club for voyeurs. And basically, she ends up getting a job there, and this guy ends up coming in and really connecting with her. Like, he kind of really likes her and keeps requesting her, and he kind of like develops like a little bit of a thing for her, but she has no idea who he is because it's a whole anonymous situation. And either way, it's finally the first day of classes, and she walks into class, and who do you know is her teacher? This guy that has been visiting her at this sex club. So he recognizes who she is, she does not recognize who he is, and then obviously it's going to end up being their romance. So I thought that this was a very unique teacher-student romance, and I very much enjoyed it. So if that was something that sounded like it was up your alley, I definitely recommend looking into this book a little bit more and seeing if it might be for you. So I did recommend this book in the last video that I made that was exactly like this, but I feel like this is a separate, like, a question, and it fits so well into this book. So I really couldn't help myself but add it in. And basically someone asked for pen pals only to meet in real life and realize that they know each other and are actually enemies to lovers. And right away when I read that, I'm like, you're literally explaining this book. So I really couldn't help but give you this book in case you have not read this one yet. And that is Top Secret by Elle Kennedy and Serena Bowen. So this is a college romance between these two guys. So it's a male-male romance. And basically this guy has a girlfriend, and his girlfriend had asked for a threesome for her birthday. So this guy basically has to now go and find another guy to join this couple in their threesome. So he gets on this app and starts talking to this like other random guy, seeing if he wants to be involved in their threesome. And this guy starts asking him questions. They kind of start to get really close. And this guy who is in a relationship starts to realize, like, maybe I am more attracted to guys than I ever thought I was. And then it kind of goes down that hill of like, maybe I'm actually gay and I never really knew that about myself. And basically, it happens to be in real life, these two people are actually part of the same fraternity, and they live like next door to each other, like in the same house. They literally like share a floor with each other, and they very much do not get along, but they don't realize that that is who they're talking to when they're online. So they're getting close online, not realizing that they hate each other in real life. And obviously they're going to figure it out eventually, and the story is going to go from there. So if that was something that you were looking for and you have not read this book yet, this one just like fits so freaking perfectly into what you asked for. So this is the last one that I'm going to be doing for you guys, but somebody asked for good fantasy books that's not super popular, and it happens to be, I get so many responses extremely similar to this, like unpopular fantasy romance books or unpopular fantasy books or YA fantasy books that nobody talks about, things along those lines. And happens to be, I've even gotten these requests in previous videos, and I've answered these requests in previous videos, but I feel like nobody's actually listening to me when I give this specific recommendation. So I'm going to keep repeating the same exact one until I start getting DMs that you guys listened to me, you read it, and you absolutely loved it. So that book is the Trial series by Amanda Hocking. So the first book is Switch, the second book is Switch, Torn, and then Ascend. So this is one of my favorite series of all time. You can literally see how beaten up this book is. Like, literally, I've had this for years. I've read this so many freaking times that I literally cannot read it anymore because I just know it by heart, and it's just not fun to read anymore because I literally can just like sit down, close my eyes, and just like retell myself the story without actually having to look at the words. But basically, this is a YA fantasy romance series where it basically has just a lot of good stuff going on for it all around the board. You're following this girl who finds out at the beginning of the story that she's actually a changeling. She always knew that she was a little bit different, but she thought that she was just like a normal human, and she actually finds out that she was switched at birth, and she's actually the princess to this entire trial community. So she basically doesn't have a choice because she has to go and figure out how to control her powers that she's having. So she ends up going with this guy who came to collect her and brings her back to her mother, who is the queen of these trial people, and she's going to learn how to like deal with her power. She's going to learn how to be a princess, everything along those lines. At the same time, she's going to end up having a romance with the bodyguard that had originally picked her up and told her that she was a changeling. And then obviously there's 3 books in the series, so it's going to go a certain way. There's going to be a couple of more romances, but either way, it's a really freaking good time. I absolutely love it. There's politics, there's magic, there's like fae, trolls, whatever it is that you want to call it. There's princesses and princes, and there's just so many good stuff going on for this series. So if you have not read it yet and you like YA fantasy romance series, I literally do not know what you're waiting for. And I'm going to keep repeating the same exact one again until I start getting DMs that you guys actually tried this book. So with that said, that is the last one that I wanted to share with you. But I did actually want to leave you guys on a question of if you can give me a recommendation, because somebody did ask for the best jealousy scene. He sees her interacting with another guy, not cheating, and loses it. And it happens to be, I feel like I have read this scene specifically so many times, but when I went and I stared at my shelf and tried to remember books that had this scene specifically, nothing came to me. So if you do have any recommendations where this actually took place, I would love for you to leave me a comment down below, because I really would love to answer this question in the next video that I do like this. So either way, with that said, that is all I've got for you guys for today's video. So I hope that you found some good book recommendations to add to your holiday wish list. And either way, if you just enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you are not currently subscribed, because I would really appreciate it. But either way, thank you so much for just taking the time to watch my video, because I really do appreciate that. So with that said, until next time, enjoy reading.